Welcome to the session. If you are in the wrong room, now is the time to leave. No, I'm just kidding. Good morning, everyone. Hope you've all had some coffee. Today we're just going to go through Power BI meets programmability. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior data and analytics consultant over at 3Cloud. I'm also on the board of directors for PASS Minnesota and also co-organizer for the Lexington user group. So if you're in either of those states, hit me up. Definitely can get you connected with the local community. I also co-author on Data on Wheels, and I'm a co-founder of Data on Rails. If you don't know what any of that means, I do have swag in the back, and I'd be happy to talk with you guys after the session. Lots of fun stuff going on as we kind of ramp back up in the data community in person. My experience overall includes implementing and managing enterprise-level Power BI, training teams on report best practices, and I just love learning new coding languages to hack into Power BI. So I'll have a slide up at the end, again, with the connection details, as well as a QR code to my LinkedIn. Makes things a lot easier. All right. So to kick us off, I just wanted to put things in perspective. I know that tech has seen a lot of downturn recently, but the trends are saying that we're going to keep on going, right? People are still creating data. In 2015, companies spent an average of $7.4 million on data-driven initiatives. By 2022, that number went up to 12.3 million, with 50% of the executives that got interviewed estimating that budget will only increase. So that's a 40% increase, and it highlights a really clear priority on cultivating a data-driven culture. So what I kind of want to talk to you guys today about is how to harness that budget in the best and most efficient way possible within your reporting enterprise solutions. So you might have asked yourself, why are we talking about C#? I'm a Power BI developer. I chose that on purpose because I didn't have to learn things like C#. Well, in case you were wondering, the answer is that BI and app developers are better together. So the whole point of this is that app dev, those teams have traditionally built more scalable, adaptable, and programmable solutions in the past that we get to learn from by harnessing the back-end implications of Power BI. So before I go into the demo, which is the fun part and scary part because it is a lot of C#, I just want to go over a couple important terms with you guys. So to start out with, the tabular object model, or TOM for short, because that's way too many syllables. The tabular object model, it exposes that native tabular metadata object in order to support programming of the tabular models. So if you're familiar with SSAS, this is going to sound really familiar. Most of the documentation that I use for this is based off of SSAS. Thankfully, for all of us, it's also in the back end of Power BI. So the nice part is that we have a long history to lean on when we look into the future of how we're going to programmatically change our way of thinking around enterprise solutioning. With that in mind, I just want to also just touch on a couple of things. The analysis services. It's an analytical data engine, or VertiPack, as we've all known to grow and love, that provides a semantic data model for reports and applications. We're going to be kind of hacking into the analytical services, so it's good to know what it is as you know it, right? When we log in and we see that breakdown of tables, we see that breakdown of columns, we get to build our hierarchies. That's what I mean by the analysis services. The XMLA endpoint is basically XML for analysis, right? It communicates between applications and that analysis service engine that we just talked about. So what we're going to be doing today will rely heavily on the XMLA endpoint. So just a little caveat for you guys, you will need premium or premium per user in order to do what we're talking about today. Thankfully, the idea behind this is that it would go for an enterprise level solution. So if you're having that amount of scale, chances are you at least have an embedded SKU. So something like that will get you that premium access that you need. And with that, it's demo time, guys. So take your sips of coffee now, or forever hold your peace. All right. So I will zoom in quite a bit, so don't worry too much. This is also available on a GitHub at the end, and I am going to walk through every piece of this so we all understand what's happening and why you might use it, right? Because you might be looking at this going, nope, Never. So what I'm gonna do is kind of show you guys a couple of use cases as well as the cool stuff you could probably even do in your own reporting solutions today. All right. So zooming in, you might have noticed instantly, yeah.
Sorry, could you switch to light background?
Yeah, no problem. Let me see here. I say no problem. Let's see. Yeah, let me see if I've got
Go to the search bar and just type
light mode.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always open to feedback, guys. So feel free to let me know. If you're like, I can't read it, I can zoom more. So just let me know. Alrighty, guys. So as you might have noticed, at the top here, we've got a couple of classes that we're pulling in. So if you're familiar with C#, which I wasn't when I was building this, what happens is you're essentially pulling in these packages. So Microsoft has made a analysis services tabular object class for us to pull from. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build a pseudo C# application without a front end to it. So don't worry, we'll be flipping back and forth between the service and this, so your eyes won't go completely cross-eyed and we can actually see the results of our labor. So with that in mind, I'll just kind of go through the first steps here. The first step is obviously to connect to my Power BI Premium workspace. So in this demo, I'm going to have it essentially pop up with an Azure AD login credential. So I'm just going to log in that way. You can use a service principal, and you should do that if you're going to be doing something that's repeatable, something that's going to integrate into your C# application. But if you're like me and maybe you're doing this as a proof of concept and you don't have access to making service principals, this is the way to go. So from there, so I've got my workspace. If you're questioning how do I know my workspace connection string, that you can actually find in Power BI. So if I flip back over to my Power BI service, you'll notice I've got my little diamond in the corner here, signifying that it's a premium workspace. I can also flip back over to premium here, and you can see I've got a workspace connection string. That's the string that I'm going to use in my XMLA endpoint connection. So if I come back over to the C#, you might have noticed that I'm making a couple variables, right? So to start off with, I'm connecting to the server. Now, if you are like me and you love using SSMS and you love SQL, this is going to get a little confusing, right? So the way that they've built these classes, a server in this case is a workspace. So what I'm doing is I'm setting this up to say, hey, I'm going to call this server, and this server is going to use the connection string to grab my workspace information. As we go along, you might have noticed already, we've got database here. Database is a data set. So as I go along, hope that doesn't confuse you guys too much. I'm going to keep the names the same as the documentation so that if you're going back and forth, it's a lot easier. But if you ever wanted to, obviously, you can change the name of these variables. All right, so from there, once we connect, I have a few things that I want it to tell me exist in the current state. So this is just kind of where we get to see as we go through these demos what already happened, and then we're going to have a final state list out at the end to tell us what's changed. So pretty simple stuff. I do want to go over a couple of things with you guys. First of all, this is the power of C#. For each. We get to loop. So that's the win, I think. That's programmability, right? So as we go through these steps, you'll notice there's going to be a lot of for eaches, and that's because I don't want to list everything out. You guys don't want to see me run through thousands of lines of code. It's bad enough we got hundreds, right? So as we go through this, you'll notice that I have this console write line. Again, this is not something you're typically going to put into your final code. This is so that we all get to see that something has changed, and it's not just this black box process. What I wanted to do is I wanted to tell me every database ID, the name, and the compatibility level. The reason I'm grabbing compatibility level is because this only works with data sets that are 1200 and above. So if you magically have a data set that has never been touched in the service for the past, I think, 3 years, you probably need to pull that down, hit a little refresh, publish that back up to the service, and you'll be good to go. But just in case, it's good to know what your compatibility level is before you try something out. All right. The next step is we're going to go through the model. So as you might have heard, you might be noticing these things kind of nest, right? So we've got our server, we've got our database, our data set. Within there, we have a model. Within the model is going to be all of our fun stuff, right? All of our tables, all of our columns, measures, and hierarchies, even translations, which we're going to do in a little bit. So essentially what I want to do is I want to call specifically the model for the data set that I'm working with. Now, I know the data set ID because I've grabbed it before, but again, this is where you can definitely have things run through as variables, right? Loop it through so that nothing is hard-coded. Again, a lot of this is for the purpose of demoing, so we all know what we're talking about, and it does limit the scope. Otherwise, it's going to be so impossible to read the scripts and figure out what's happening later. With that, once I have my model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a table that I know exists in my model. So first, I want it to tell me every single table that exists and if it's hidden. Now, again, there are a million things you can pull from these classes. I'm just pulling a couple to show you guys what you can list out. The cool thing about this is you could also have it write to SQL, right? So it's a good way to know what exists in your enterprise tenant. You can loop through workspaces, loop through data sets, and grab everything that everybody is using and document it more efficiently. All right, the is hidden is especially useful if you're trying to figure out, do I have tables in here that Power BI has made in the back end that I can't see? So even date tables will show up here if you have that auto date time on. All right, the next section is going to be just listing out a couple more variables. I've got my product table, I've got a measure table, and we're going to be using those in the future, so I'm just building them now. The last couple of things I want it to do are tell me all the columns in that table. I want it to tell me all the measures in the measure table. And then I want it to list out my translations and hierarchies. Now you might be thinking, why, oh why, are we going into translations in a 1-hour session? There's actually a fun way you can use translations that doesn't actually change a language, right? You can actually overwrite your existing culture to change a column name. You might be like, why wouldn't I just change the column name? Well, if you think about it, if you have multiple reports, you have multiple people who are going off of the same enterprise data set, you can add various translations into their specific workspaces, so you end up with one enterprise solution that you can deploy across multiple teams without having to go in and manually change every single column to what they want to call it. The use case I've seen for this is GL codes, right? Everyone calls each segment something else. You get someone who wants to call that first section department, and somebody else wants to call it company. What are you going to do with that, you know? So the nice thing is, typically, they want to call it that because that's how it shows up in their application. That's what's been shown to them over and over and over again. So what you can have them do is when that application changes the name, it can now generate the C# to then change it in the model. So you're starting to see where these connect, these dots can connect, so that way anything you're changing in your actual enterprise solution will translate seamlessly into your reporting. All right, that's enough talking. We can go through some of these, but just wanted you guys to see as well. I've got an if statement here. So if else, very easy to do in C#. Essentially what I'm having it do is check and see if there is a category or a hierarchy called category hierarchy. Otherwise, I wanted to tell me, hey, there's no category hierarchy. That's important because we might be deleting the category hierarchy in a little bit. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this guy. And you guys have made it through the first section of C#. All right. So this is what I'm talking about with that authentication pop-up. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And what will happen is we're going to get all of those right consoles now in this console script. So I'm going to scroll back up. Let's see if I can zoom a little bit. So at a high level, just so you can see it, I've got a couple of data sets. And let me go ahead and come back up here. So I've got a couple of data sets, and I've got a few tables in there. I've got no hidden tables because I turned off my auto date time filter a long time ago, but this is where it would pop up. The nice thing is I've also can see here I've got these columns, and I've got one called row number, but that doesn't exist in my model. Something that's cool about Power BI is it builds a lot of things in the back end to speed up your reporting that you might not know about, that's secretly bloating your report. So if you think to yourself, my report is going really slow, but I don't really want a star schema, you might want to remember that it's building row numbers in the back to index your tables. So go ahead and build that star schema. Build out those dimensions, separate it from your facts so it can run more efficiently. All right, I've also got a couple of hierarchies. I've got lineage tags. The reason I'm calling a lineage tag is because that's what you really want to call in your scripts if you're making something more scalable. You don't want to be calling things by name because names can change. These lineage tags are auto-generated by Power BI unless you make your own columns, measures, or hierarchies. Then you have to add them yourself, or else they won't have a lineage tag. You can see how that might be a problem. So we're going to go through that, but it is definitely not a required field, unfortunately. So something to keep in mind as you build out your scripting, you're going to want to have a process that generates a lineage tag for those new columns or measures. Mine are pretty simple when I go through it. It's just going to be the name of the column. Obviously, that's not very scalable, so I trust that if you're building something like this, you'll think of something a little bit more creative, you know? All right. And then my final state in this one is going to look exactly the same, so we're not going to go through it. Whew. All right, that was a lot. So the next part is me just showing you I have nothing up my sleeve. So I'm going to publish this PBIX file up to my premium workspace. We can take a quick look at it. You'll notice that underneath the product table, I've got a few things here. I've got a category, I've got a category hierarchy, and a few standard columns that you might recognize from a certain AdventureWorks database. Someday I will figure out how to pull in the Lord of the Rings scripts, and this will be way cooler. So stay tuned. All right, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and publish this up to my happy coding database or server. There we go. Oh, there we go. Whew. All right, so if I come back up here, you'll notice it's refreshing. And this is what we're going to be using today. All right, so with that in mind, you've now seen I've published something, right? I do have a section called deleting columns and measures. That's going to be in the GitHub, but we're not going to use it because we're going to be deleting and adding at the same time. Because if I deleted everything and then re-added it, you guys would be here for about 5 more hours. And I enjoy you guys not running away. So as we continue on, I'm going to skip through that. We're going to go into our adding columns and measures section. So as you might have noticed, that handy dandy if statement is coming in here. Essentially what I want it to do is, hey, if I have this column testing, go ahead and let me know the column exists. If I don't, go ahead and make a new data column. Now keep in mind this is a data column. They're all multiple column types in C# in that object class. So as we go along, we'll make another kind, and I'll call that out again. This one's going to be pretty simple. I've got a source column called product, and basically I'm going to throw that into my testing. You'll notice I have that lineage tag, just product testing column, and then I want it to tell me that that column got created, so I know that something happened. The reason I have it all wrapped in an if statement is so that I can run this script multiple times without commenting out my code every time. That way, if you guys are running POCs as well, it will continue to run without issue. All right, the next section here is going to be a measure. Now this one I'm doing something else. What I'm going to do is if this measure exists, I'm actually going to change the measure expression. Now the cool thing about changing the measure expression here is once I run this again, so we're going to run it once and we should get hello world in our test measure. On the second time, it should flip to hello happy coders. So I want you guys to keep an eye out for that. But obviously, if you have a string of measures that you have in maybe 50 reports, right, and you had to keep them all in separate models for one reason or another, and someone goes, by the way, we need to change that measure in everything. and your heart just drops. This is a way around it. You can have it go through and look for the different data models that you need to change that measure in, have it look for that measure name, and update it. You can see where that would just save you tons of time. I do want to call out, though, in the best interest of all of our sanities, once you write via the XMLA endpoint, you can no longer download that PBIX file. So, if you're thinking ahead, something I've seen people do is they will essentially manage everything inside of either tabular editor or inside of a C# code like this, so then they can see and track changes along the way and know what might be different from their stored PBIX file. So just something to keep in mind. All right, again, I've made a lineage tag, super simple test measure. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and run through this. Oh, you know what might help is if I clear this guy up. There we go. Just thinking, there we go. All right. So you might have noticed a couple of things. We've got a column created and a measure added. I get a little more excited about column creation. I don't know what it is, but something about that just seems more fun. If you're thinking ahead and you're like, oh, you know what, column created is actually really handy because I've got this SQL query and it has, I'm grabbing all the columns from the table, but every time they add a new column, my end users want to see it, and I now have to go in and refresh it in PBIX because it won't catch it on the refresh. The reason is the schema is really hard-coded in PBIX, or in the Power BI service, I'm sorry. So once it's up there, it doesn't really want to change. It doesn't want to add columns, even though those columns exist in your source system. This is a good way to just dynamically add more columns as you're adding them to your SQL table. Presumably, something is writing those columns to your SQL table. That is not a human. If it is a human, then I'm very sorry for them, but they will also need to add it into your Power BI model, right? No. But I do think that it's handy to know that you have a solution here that doesn't require you to go into it all the time. All right, so now if we go into our final state, you'll notice we have a couple of new things. We've got column testing, and we have our new test measure. So I'm pretty slick, but if you don't believe me, let's go into the service. So I'm going to pop up here, click into my tabular object model. And you might be thinking to yourself, she told us that she was showing us all this stuff, and I don't know if she's being real. Just so you remember, we just published this PBIX file. You'll notice I don't have a testing column, and I don't have a testing measure. So if I go back in here and I click on Edit, underneath Product, we now have a testing column, and underneath Measures, I now have a test measure. Pretty slick, pretty slick. I will say, the fun thing about this is your end users who keep their PowerPoint or the Power BI reports up all the time. We know them, we love them, but they're going to have to refresh their browser. So Power BI does cache. If they're not seeing it and you have this set up, just ask them to kindly refresh their browser. All right, so as promised, I'm going to pull our test measure, not into a random box, but in here. And currently it says hello world. That will be changing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our reading view. Save that. And we're going to pop back into the next section of this code. So the next section is going to be adding it with DAX functions. Because you might be thinking, she's just doing text, this is cheating. No, we're actually going to add it with some DAX. So the fun part about this is things like, maybe your tax changes depending on where you live. Maybe that tax amount is going to change pretty dynamically, and your applications are set up to handle that. Now your Power BI report can too. So if you have a variable that it's able to plug into your expression here, you can have that dynamically change as the tax changes. Again, just throwing use cases out there for you guys. If they don't stick, they will eventually, right? All right. So with this one, again, I'm going to make a new column. I'm going to call it list price with tax. I want it to then tell me, hey, by the way you're making a new column. Now, like I said before, our earlier column was just called a data column. This one is now a calculated column. Now, for those of you who are DAX specialists, you're thinking, ah, yes, calculated columns, push it upstream. This is not upstream. So if you're trying to do something a little bit more, how should I put this? I'm not against calculated columns, but I do think that they are better suited to be pushed into the SQL layer. So wherever possible, push it into SQL. Don't use this calculated column. But if you don't have that kind of access or you don't have that kind of control over your source systems, this will definitely get you there. So you can make a new calculated column using DAX. Again, I put copious notes mostly for my own, memory, but also for all of our sanity. So all of this, again, will be in the repo, but just wanted to call that out. Now, a couple things you might have noticed is I'm calling this table product, and then I've got columns.add. Now, the reason is I can't just create a column. I have to add it to my model. Now, it's interesting, as we go along, when we get to hierarchies, what will have to happen is you have to add it into every single layer. So you have to add it one layer up in the tabular object model. So in this case, one layer up from our column is going to be our table, and our table will be refreshed at the end of this script. So I'll just kind of show you guys that real quick. We do also have a measure, so we'll be making a measure as well. You can see this expression is definitely DAX. It's fairly simple, but again, the point of this is just to show you guys what's possible, right? Not a DAX class. There are plenty of those available by some amazing people here. So definitely reach out to them if you have any questions on how this will work. But I have seen people do very complicated DAX in this measure expression. If you can do it in your Power BI desktop, you can do it here. So just something to note. Again, if you're doing source control on your Power BI measures, this is a good way because you can actually print out the measure. So again, little things, little tips and tricks that are going to make your life a little bit more seamless as you go into an enterprise scale. All right, and with that, I'm going to remember to delete this line. And then real quick, I just want to show you guys at the bottom here, this last section here is vital. So what we're doing is we're actually requesting a full refresh of our table product, a full refresh of our measure table, and then I've got a refresh of my actual model, and then I've got to save changes. Now, save changes has to go at the end. I have accidentally put it not at the end many times, and it will quickly fail. And I say quickly as a joke. It will not quickly fail. It will try everything, and then it'll say it worked just fine, and then you'll go to the service, and it's not there. So save changes is vital, and it has to be at the end after you've refreshed your tables and your model itself. All right, just wanted to call that out for you guys. We'll obviously get back to it. If I come back up here, let's go ahead and hit run. And we should get some more fun stuff. There we go. All right, so with this one, you might have noticed in our current state, we now have our testing column. We've also got our testing measure. So what we've got now is it tells us, hey, by the way, your column already exists. I'm not making it again. Your measure exists. I'm not making it again. Now we've got our calculated column got created and a measure added. Again, I think columns, it's just something about it just feels more fun. All right, so final state, you might notice now I've got a DAX measure example, and then I've got a list price with tax. So we're going to go back up to the model, and a couple things should change when we get there. Now this is where I'm calling out, you remember how I said this hello world would just change? Unfortunately, it won't because I have it open, right? So if I hit this little refresh, or this guy over here. Oh, there it goes. You'll notice now I have hello happy coders. So again, you have to make sure that you're telling people to refresh it if you have these things dynamically running in the background. We all have that CEO who's going to ask you that question. The first answer to that question is going to be, have you refreshed your browser? All right. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and go into edit mode again. And what we should see is our DAX measure example. And in product, we've got our list price with tax. So again, pretty handy stuff, especially if you're trying to add stuff on the fly, or if you want to have user-defined fields automatically populate into your data model. All right. With that, we're going to go into the fun stuff, in my opinion, hierarchies. Now, if you have ever done an internal report, you might have noticed very quickly that the set level of hierarchies doesn't exist, right? You might have your C level, and then you're going to have your VPs, and then you're going to have your managers, and then your employees. Inevitably, something's going to happen where now you have 3 levels of managers. Now you have somebody who's hopped 2 levels. Having something like a dynamic changing hierarchy that can account for no matter how many levels you have is vital. I've also seen this with GL codes, right? One customer has 6, one customer has 8 sections in their GL code, and they want to all see all levels, right? And you don't want to have a bunch of empty ones in there for them. They tend to not like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially edit our category hierarchy. We're going to flip some levels just for fun, and then we're going to make a hierarchy from scratch just so you can see how that would work. All right, so if I come down here, so I have a hierarchy already in my model called category hierarchy. It's very logically laid out, category, subcategory, product. We're going to make it less well thought out. We're going to switch subcategory and category just so we can see it at a glance. We're also going to rename it. Just in case you want to rename your hierarchies, I just want you guys to have all the code available that I thought would be useful. Again, there's a lot more to these classes than I'm going through, so feel free to check out the documentation that Microsoft provides. If there's something that you're thinking, she didn't cover this, it's probably in there. So just something to call out. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to edit an existing hierarchy level. Now, I have my lineage tags here. Again, this is hard-coded so that we all know what's going on, and so it doesn't just loop through a bunch of stuff. As you go along with C# coding, you can always plug and play a variable here as well. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and called level category this lineage tag, and then I've got my subcategory. You might notice that we've got a class here called hierarchy category, and then we've got levels underneath that. So, yeah.
Where do you find those tag numbers?
Yes, so I have them printed actually earlier in the script.
Well, you know, like,
Yeah.
where do
Oh,
you,
sorry.
like, define them?
So the question was how to find these lineage tags, yeah? So to find the lineage tags, you actually have to call them through either the XMLA or through an API. They exist in the back end. I have not seen them in the front end. Yeah, so what I do is I do one of those console write lines, and I have it grab the lineage tag of that level. Yeah.
Open the model in Tabular Editor and just copy that.
Tabular Editor also has it in there. All right. So as we go along, want to call out to you guys, ordinal is going to be the order that it shows up in the hierarchy. It starts at 0. So if you put something as 1 and you don't have something in 0, it will make a blank category level for you, just for fun. So I highly recommend starting at 0 and then going up. So with that, you'll notice that I'm just flipping the order of these guys, just calling those variables from above. And then I'm going to have it tell me, hey, your category levels got renamed and reordered. All right, so if there's a level 2 or hierarchy called model, which there's not currently, what I wanted to do is I wanted to add model as another level. So you might have noticed that this is slightly different from above, because here I've got an actual, all of the different pieces to the puzzle that I'm going to need. So I have a name, so I'm calling it model. I can change that, but again, I just want to make everything easy for all of us to recognize exactly what's happening. I'm putting it as ordinal 2, so it'll show up in the 3rd position. And then I've got it coming from my table product, and I want it to find my column model. Again, you can put the lineage tag here. This is just easier to read code, so we're just going to do it this way. And then I'm adding a lineage tag to my hierarchy level. So again, we have lineage tags for the column. We've got lineage tags for hierarchy levels. We've got lineage tags for hierarchies. They're all over the place. If you forget them, they will come up as blank. So just something to keep in mind. The next thing I'm doing is I'm adding this level model into my hierarchy category. I don't have to add the category or the hierarchy itself back onto the model because it already exists, right? So I'm good there. I just have to add it one level up, which is going to be the hierarchy category itself. And then I want it to write a line for me, hierarchy level added. Perfect. One more thing we're going to do is we're going to add a totally new hierarchy. So we haven't done too much craziness as far as adding brand new things. Columns and measures are super fun. Hierarchies are a little bit more complicated. So basically we're calling a hierarchy class. We're saying, hey, I'm going to call this a hierarchy new as a variable. It's going to call the object hierarchy. Pretty simple, right? What I want it to be called is new hierarchy, and I'm making this lineage tag new hierarchy lineage tag. Again, make this as complicated as you want. I just want to make sure that you guys know what's going on as we go through the code. So it's a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to walk through if you have to demo this to somebody else. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to create some levels to this new hierarchy. Also, you might have noticed my hierarchy, because it is brand new, I am adding it to my product table. Now I can add it anywhere, but I definitely want it on my product table because that's actually where all of my columns are going to come from. So again, just something to keep in mind as you're making things. It will let you make them and not connect them back into the tabular object model itself, but they'll just be floating in space. You'll never be able to see them in the actual report. So make sure you connect it to that next level up in the tabular object model. All right, so the next section, again, we're just going to create some levels. So you'll notice what I want it to do is I want it to put model in that first position. I've got it finding model, and I'm creating a lineage tag for this level. Again, I'm not making a lineage tag for the column, just for this level in the hierarchy. I'm making another level, level 2, and then I'm adding those levels into my new hierarchy. Again, I don't need to now add the new hierarchy onto the table again, because it already exists there. Then I want it to tell me, by the way, your levels have been added to your new hierarchy. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. Oh, and of course, I get too excited to run it and forget my own code exists. There we go. All right. And again, that you can get past by just having a server's principal, and it'll just call that automatically without the pop-up. All right, so from here, we're going to go down to our final state. You'll notice we've got a few new things here. We've got a category hierarchy renamed. Our levels got renamed and reordered. I've got a new level added. I've made a new hierarchy, and we've added levels to that hierarchy. So we've done a lot in this section. What we're going to do is we're going to see the fruits of our labor down here at the bottom. You'll notice that now we've got a couple of things happened. These have switched order. So I've now got subcategories level 0, and then I've got my category as level 1. And then we've also got a new level in here, model. Now, when we go back to the Power BI report, what you might have noticed, and I'll pull up the original again, is in our XMLA interactions page, I actually had this category hierarchy pulled into a visual. So we're going to see how that changes or doesn't based on what we've done here. All right, and then the last thing is we've made that new hierarchy, just called new hierarchy, and we've added a couple levels to that. So let's see how that works in the service. Now again, nothing has changed yet. If I go ahead and click refresh, it's thinking really hard. Now you might notice we get this handy dandy error. Something's wrong with one or more of your fields. All right, let me see the details. All it does is tell you that these categories in your hierarchy, these levels in your hierarchy are not quite right. Now you can understand that would be really frustrating for end users as they're trying to make visuals. If you are changing their hierarchies without them knowing, their visuals will break. What used to happen, I think before, as of like 3 months ago, it now just breaks the visual. What used to happen is that it would just break apart your hierarchy and have the same old order that was there before. So thankfully, it's pretty easy to fix if you have personalized visuals on. You can come in here and you can just change it. You can pull in whatever you needed to. I've got this category hierarchy, so I know that I wanted my subcategory on the top, and then I wanted this one to be the second level in that hierarchy. So again, just calling that out for you guys so you understand what's going on, and how easy it is to kind of break the visuals, unfortunately, because they're not part of the tabular object model. So, yeah.
Got a question from online which says, can you use C# for Power BI source control?
For source control. So the question is, can you use C# for Power BI source control? So you can use it for source control as far as the actual tabular object model. Unfortunately, not for anything you're changing visually, right? Because that's just not part of this. So what I've seen people do is as they are deploying their C#, they will include in that to write somewhere, you know, to a repo so that you're able to then see the changes. You can track changes a lot easier in C#. I think actually there are tools that already exist for Power BI that also do this really well. So I would check those out unless you have an app development team that is wanting to handle your source control for you, which is always handy, you know. All right, so real quick, because we're running out of time, just wanted to show you guys that last piece of the puzzle, which is translations. I won't go too far into this. The idea here being that you have a culture, is what they call translations, within a model. I'm going to have it tell us what the existing culture is, and then I'm going to grab the ENUS, because that's the culture that I'm in currently. And what I want it to do is I'm going to have it overwrite the word skew. So again, this has got a lot in it, and I've got a lot of comments in here, so feel free to check it out later. Essentially, what I'm going to have it do is grab that metadata object for skew that is the translation. And what I want it to do is I'm going to take that translated property, and if it doesn't exist, right, if there is no translation for this object, what I want to do is add one or overwrite it. So in this part, I've got if the translation is null, aka there is no translation on that object for that culture, I want to overwrite it with cool stuff. Pretty simple, again, just so we can see it. I don't really like the word skew, so I'm changing it to cool stuff because it's more fun. If I come over here, you might notice that if it exists, I'm removing it. That's because what I want to do is run this twice so we can see it change. You cannot have more than one translation per object per culture. It will fail. So thankfully it fails, because otherwise, what would it do, you know? It can't return both. There's only one spot for it. All right, so the second time it runs, I want it to say totally rad, because, you know, why not? So what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm going to come over and uncomment this code out. And I'm actually going to pull it into this report ahead of time so we can see skew. All right. And then if I run this guy, again, the use case here is you don't want to change your actual column name, but you want it to change for your end users. And obviously you can do this with actual language translations as well. Oh, and I renamed my hierarchy. I have this on purpose in the code because otherwise I forget to tell you guys that you should always use lineage tags because names change. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. And actually I'm going to stop that and rerun it. But I've already said that so many times, you know, so I think we're good to go. All right, what am I missing here? Oh, rename. So again, use lineage tags. Don't use the find name because you might change your name and not change your script. So all right, from here, again, we've got our final state. I've added in a final translation. You'll notice it should say totally rad. Again, if I go back to the report, I've got that handy dandy skew still because I have to refresh. I hit refresh, and now it becomes totally rad. So pretty cool if you just want to rename stuff on the fly without having to rename the entire column. All right, guys, so that is the end of my demo. Are there any other questions? I know we've been kind of taking questions throughout. Yeah. Good question. So the question was, is the refresh at the end synchronous or asynchronous? And it's a full refresh. So you can do synchronous or asynchronous. You can definitely program that in. Again, for the purposes of this one, I want it to fully refresh, but my data model is like a very small Excel file. So if you're doing something that's a little bit more complicated, definitely pick your refresh type. Any other questions, guys? Yeah. Sorry, one more time. The question is, can we access that library in Python? You can access it. You can't access this library, so you can access a different library in Python. So I actually have an entire blog post about hacking into the backend using Python instead of C#, but it is a different object class. So, yeah. And if you want, I'll put this up as well, but I do have links for those classes, so I can show you where those are. Cool. Well, I think we are pretty close on time, so I just want to give you guys a chance. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to please give feedback. There is some swag at the back table. Please take some. I just find it fun. So, yeah, I'm Kristyna, and thanks for coming, guys.